AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey. And by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We got a great show coming up today, a really good one. Gary's not here, so we're going to make a little bit of changes in that. But we're going to be talking about battery recycling, EV battery recycling, and others too, but especially EVs. Like, who's doing it? Who's supplying batteries? What kind of materials can you get out of that? Who's buying those materials? And we're going to get into this because we got an expert in the field, David Klanecky. He's the CEO of a company called Cirba Solutions. Hello there, David.
Hey, good afternoon, John. How you doing?
Oh, I can't wait. We've also got John Voelcker from Car and Driver coming on the show. I love having him on. He knows more about EVs than anybody else that I know. And we've got Sean filling in for Gary Vasilash today. And Sean, it's cool to have you on the show.
It's awesome to be here. Thanks.
So David, I'm going to kick it off. And as Sean, John, you guys know, pile in at any time. But David, I still hear a lot of people saying, well, you know, EVs they're not really good for the environment for a whole host of reasons. And one of the things they bring up almost invariably is nobody knows how to recycle batteries. What do you tell them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I tell them that we've been doing it for over 30 years. Battery recycling has been around in various forms or fashions. Lots of different chemistries of batteries obviously are used in the industry. You can go all the way back to things like lead acid batteries or alkaline batteries that are in your remote controls or whatever. But then hybrid electric vehicles have been out for a number of years, and a lot of technology is out there today to extract the critical metals out of hybrid type batteries, including nickel metal hydride, nickel cadmium type batteries. But obviously the topic of today is all around lithium and lithium ion based batteries and where that's at. And lithium ion batteries have been launched for quite a while. It's been in consumer electronics for probably a good 15, 20 years. And a lot of those batteries have been recycled. A company like ourselves, Cirba Solutions, has been around for over 30 years, recycling batteries, collecting those materials, and then reprocessing those materials so that critical minerals can be put back into the supply chain. But for now, the EV space with these larger lithium ion based batteries, that's a massive focus right now for companies like ourselves, really trying to look at how do we build out the capacity to recover those critical minerals and get them back into the supply chain so they can be used over and over again.
So you say Cirba's been around for 30 years, but I never heard of you guys before.
Yeah.
And so tell us how this company came together, because even though you've been doing it for 30 years, the name Cirba Solutions has not been around that long.
No, that's a fair point. The name Cirba Solutions has been around for just about a year. We rebranded the company about a year ago, and it was really, the name Cirba starts with, circular and batteries. So trying to create that circular supply chain for battery materials. That's why we came up with Cirba. So a little bit of creativity there on our marketing organization. But we are actually a combination of three different companies that came together, like I said, last year, about a year ago. The Heritage Battery Recycling Group, for those of you who don't know the Heritage Group, it's a phenomenal family-owned company, fourth generation, 93-year-old company based out of Indianapolis. They do a lot of work in various areas in aggregates, in specialty chemicals, but also in waste management. And about 6 years ago, they started looking at this space and found that there was an opportunity with a lot of battery materials showing up in waste streams that they thought, there's got to be a better way to take care of these materials and handle them versus sending them to an incinerator or to a landfill. So they formed something called Heritage Battery Recycling, did a lot of work studying the battery space, and obviously we're fairly smart in looking at this space is going to evolve really rapidly. And in 2021, they acquired a company called Retrieve Technologies, which most people, when you say the word Retrieve Technologies, like, oh yeah, I know Retrieve. They recycle batteries.
Right. I knew them. Right.
Yeah. So Retrieve had been doing a lot of the processing of batteries. Again, lead, nickel, alkaline, lithium-based batteries for a number of years. And then about April of last year, we acquired a company called Battery Solutions, which was another company that people know the name of. They've heard of Battery Solutions. And what Battery Solutions is they were a company that basically collected, sorted those battery materials, and then sent that out to processors like Retrieve to process those batteries. So we bought Heritage Battery Recycling, Retrieve Technologies, and Battery Solutions all together underneath one umbrella, one kind of vertically integrated, kind of comprehensive battery materials company. And now we're one family working together in solving some of these challenges of battery recycling today.
David, you talk about how lithium has been in cell phone batteries forever, but now we're starting to see EVs starting to gradually catch on. I'm curious of the types of EV batteries that you've seen, and are you seeing more, say, over the last 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you step back and think, back in the 2010 timeframe, there was a big push, obviously, to get a lot of electric vehicles on the road. I think the goal was 1 million vehicles on the road by 2015 was what the Obama administration had tried to push. And so there were a lot of vehicles, whether it was the Chevy the Chevy Volt or the Nissan Leaf or the Ford Focus. Actually, I see a lot of those batteries coming through our plants today because they were launched back in 2010 to 2013 timeframe. And they've now kind of starting to work their way off the roads. The battery technologies, improved significantly, and the battery capacity just isn't what it is in terms of what the driver, the consumer needs to be able to move those vehicles around the road. So we're starting to see a lot of lithium ion, even from that 2010 to 2015 range, start to come off the road today and put those through our facilities. And I mentioned the hybrid vehicles, right? There's a lot of Toyota Priuses and things like that have nickel metal hydride batteries. There's valuable metals in those batteries as well that we process in our facilities to extract them and put them back in the supply chain.
For context, I'm curious about your perspective, because we've been hearing in the EV world for 10 years that there's going to be a second life for used battery packs before folks like you get them. And I, after 10 years, just haven't seen it. There's one energy storage facility for utility in California. Every automaker seems to have one demonstration project. Aside from that, I haven't seen massive second use entrepreneurial opportunities coming up. Do you see that as an impediment to acquiring batteries, or will they go directly from the dismantlers to you to be ground up?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's never everything's one way or the other, right? There's going to be a split. I think there are opportunities for second life batteries. The challenge, if you think about it, a car battery is built to run a car, right, down a road. A battery for grid storage is a little bit different, right? It's operated a different way. The battery management system is going to be different. How the power is discharged or charged is obviously different from a vehicle versus a grid storage unit, right? For example. So I think the repurposing of batteries there's going to be people that are going to continue to work on that. But I do think, the OEMs are building batteries for cars, and the grid suppliers are looking at different chemistries and different types of technologies to be able to supply energy back into the grid after they've stored it through, renewable sources. So there's going to be a second life market out there. People are going to continue to find opportunities where it may make sense. I think on a large scale, the other thing you got to think about, John, is you got a utility company now that's going to tell, the residents of Los Angeles, let's say, that, they're going to use used car batteries to make sure that their power doesn't go off. That's a pretty big statement to make that kind of, take that liability for one, and also, get your consumers to feel confident that using a used material is going to keep their lights on.
And even more than that, you just have the problem of you're getting a bunch of batteries in from 5 to 10 years old. You have no idea what the duty cycles are because the manufacturers aren't equipped to talk about how that battery was used or share that information. Whereas you have nice, fresh new cells, which are a lot cheaper. I just don't see, for all of the reasons that we've identified. So it strikes me that, in fact, there will be a lot more batteries. If it's not a Tesla pack that's being dismantled and sold to hot rodders for conversions, which is a sort of a different side. But I think you will end up getting a lot more of these batteries sooner than people had predicted 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I can tell you, I'll jump in and say, I'm going to say 6-7 years ago, I interviewed people at Pacific Gas and Electric in California, DTE here in Detroit, Consumers Energy here in Michigan. And they said, no way are we going to use used batteries. Exactly to your point, David. They said, now look, we're very interested in new car batteries. We're definitely going to explore that, but we're not putting used batteries as a backup for the grid.
Yeah, too much liability there, and you just like you're saying, John, you don't know the cycle those batteries have gone through, how they've been either used or quote unquote abused, right? I mean, it's a challenge, and like the chemistry is going to continue to evolve such that there's going to be a focus on again, high performing vehicles are going to have a different chemistry because the consumer wants that vehicle to do something different than a person that's just driving down the road every day going back and forth to work. So I think. And you got to remember, every OEM's got a different battery chemistry. They got a different BMS. They got a different code of how that battery runs. how do you decode all that stuff and then slam it into a big pack to store energy? It's definitely a challenge, I think.
Yeah. So 2 questions that struck me, John. I'm just kind of jumping in. So
Jump in.
Number one, as we look toward really strong incentives for minerals being produced in a list of countries that does not include places like China, which at the moment has a hammerlock on battery mineral processing and apparently the majority of many of the mineral sources. Do you see a pull by customers for onshored batteries, regardless of whether they were wherever they came originally? I think onshored minerals. And number 2, is there going to be competition among companies like yours and others for bidding for that right now fairly limited supply of EV battery packs, although obviously it grows throughout the 2020s?
Yeah, I mean, you look at, like you mentioned, like you got the Inflation Recovery Act, you've got a lot of incentives out there for, one, using material that's either produced or converted here in North America. That also lends itself to just a regionalization of the supply chain, right? We learned, everybody on this phone has learned from the pandemic what happens when the supply chain gets disrupted. It really creates a lot of issues for companies. So I think there's even more of a sensitivity of how do you continue just to regionalize your supply chain. And I think as recycling becomes more and more prevalent and more, I guess, utilized, is you're captively keeping those minerals, in country per se, right? So there's an opportunity, like, again, lithium can be reused thousands of times. So can nickel, so can cobalt, right? But it's not, these things don't evaporate. So the fact that the supply chain will continue to evolve and the quantity of material that can continue to be recycled is going to, over time, just continue to increase, exponentially. That also allows you to think about the regionalization of things. And I know it's hard to think like 2040 timeframe, but I told someone the other day, 2030 is only 6 years away. It's not that far away, right? So we got a lot of work to do in the next 6 years, because people think 2030 is a long way away, but 6 years isn't that long to do all the work that this industry has to do.
What about competition? Do you foresee right now? I'm from not that I talk to scrapyards every day, but I get the sense that an EV battery pack is a little problematic. It's not something they get every day. So they're happy to have a specialist take it off their hands. Is there a circumstance where you have a variety of companies essentially bidding for that, for the metals? And when does that business turn profitable? The process of paying whatever you pay for a dead EV battery pack or an end of life pack, bring it in, dismantling it, getting the iron out of the process so you don't contaminate, tearing out the rest of the metals, and then actually bringing it down to where you can sell nickel, cobalt, et cetera, lithium, at a profit. When does that happen? And is there going to be competition among companies like yours?
Yeah, well, one, we're profitable today, so we do that today, and we're profitable. We're cash flow, EBITDA profitable. So But
David, you recycle all different kinds of batteries, laptops, cell phones. Is your EV business profitable?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
wow.
We've got different product lines, and I can separate different chemistries, so we can take the alkaline business or the nickel metal hydride business or lithium. We can separate those, and we have profitable business lines across each of those different product families. And I think, so there is a story, or there's a business model right now where, we're profitable in what we do. Scale obviously helps, right? We've got 6 operating facilities around North America to be able to do that and leverage our scale and volume that we can process. So I think that helps as well. I mean, scale obviously typically helps, when it comes to your cost position and things like that. But I think, to your point, John, there's going to be competition. There's already competition out there today about how do you source your material? Do you acquire the batteries? Do you, look at battery manufacturing scrap from all the gigafactories that are being built today or going to be built today in North America? So there's definitely going to be competition out there. I think, part of it is you've got to look at what we look at in our businesses is what are we trying to accomplish at the end of the day? And it's really to make sure that we can provide a usable critical metal back into the supply chain. And that value of that metal is obviously tied to, for example, like the LME, right? So most of these metals are traded on the LME. But you've got a component of you're not selling just nickel, right? It's not nickel going into, it could go into stainless steel if you wanted to send it for piping. This is a battery grade nickel sulfate, right? So something that's fairly specialized. I always say it's a specialty chemical. This isn't a, this isn't just, I mean, everybody's going to laugh at me and say it's a commodity. Nickel's a commodity, but a battery grade nickel sulfate is not a commodity. I can promise you that, because there's not a lot of that stuff out there today, right? So the fact that we're doing that and upgrading the quality of that material to a battery grade level is it's going to some extent demand a premium over a normal nickel type material that goes out into a piping industry or something like that. So that also is factored into our business model. We factor in the fact that we're going to procure batteries as well, right? No one's going to, if you looked at 18 months ago, 2 years ago, it was just come get these things. I don't know what to do with them, right? You just come get them from me, please. Now it's, hey, these batteries are, 12 grand. How much money can I get out of the minerals that are in there? And everybody's got their calculator out trying to do the math on what, how much nickel's in there and lithium and all that stuff. So we know that that's going to be part of the business model, and we've kind of built that in how we're operating our business.
Okay. So next question is, great. What we've been talking about so far is cobalt chemistries. Lithium iron phosphate, I would imagine, is a very different business. There's a lot of iron floating around. I don't know if there's battery grade iron for iron phosphate batteries, but one of the things I actually heard at this conference yesterday was there is clearly a business model in what you're doing. Other companies have said so. There appears to be a big question mark at this moment over the coming supply of lithium iron phosphate batteries, which really won't hit junkyards for a while. Mm-hmm. But do you see a business in that particular chemistry?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I get it a lot because there's obviously a lot of discussion about LFP batteries and LFP cathode chemistry. If you look at it, right, it's obviously, I mean, if anybody tells you it's more valuable than an NMC chemistry cathode, they're wrong, right? So tell them they're wrong, because there's really, recoverable metals in there. Lithium's your main recoverable metal, right? You don't have the nickel or cobalt in there that you can recover. So you really have to be great at lithium recovery, right? That's a key aspect of processing an LFP battery. And we by the way, we process LFP batteries every day through our facility. We see a lot of those materials coming through there already today. You got,
out of curiosity, where do they come from?
They're from vehicles. I mean, some people have been testing them, right? So you got remember, this isn't like mass production of LFP batteries coming off the line, but people are testing the batteries, and they run them through a lot of abuse testing and those things. They want to get rid of them. So we do have LFP batteries, grid storage, by the way. So there's been some of the early ESS systems have been using grid storage because they don't have space limitations and weight limitations. They can build a massive battery back. So we see some of that as well. But look, I'll throw out there, I think there's got to be a lot of, I think from an OEM or a cell manufacturer, there's got to be a lot of discussion around what's the true ESG profile of an LFP battery. What if the fact that you can't make money only recycling LFP batteries, what's that do to the economics? I know it sounds great building a car and selling it, but if you have no way of recycling that battery when it comes into life and it's going to sit in a junkyard for your example you used, then what, right? I mean, no one wants that to happen because we don't want batteries just ending up somewhere in a pile somewhere. So I think is there an economical way to recycle LFP batteries? Yes, but it's clearly not as economical as an NMC based battery. And I don't think anybody's asked that hard question to the OEMs that are out there talking about switching all the way to LFP. They're not, by the way, they're not talking about recycling these things. They're just talking about making a cheaper battery and hoping the consumer can take 20% less range.
So David, what you're saying is that you don't see your much ability to make a profit recycling LFP batteries.
You just have to be great at lithium recovery, right? You've got to really do a great job of recovering the amount of lithium that's in that battery. Again, if lithium prices drop down to where they were, 2 years ago or whatever, then it's going to be a challenge for sure. But if they stay up kind of where we think they're going to stay up, just based on the supply demand dynamics out there in lithium and what we know it costs to build a new lithium asset, for example, there's definitely a way to make money. It's just not as profitable as an NMC battery. I can promise you that.
Does cost play a role in how long materials sit around, or do materials even sit around very long for right now?
Yeah, not at our facility. We do not store materials and stack them up and just leave them sit. We actually process the materials when they go, when they get into our possession. So, we're fortunate enough. We're one of the few companies out there that have capability to actually recycle those batteries and process them through our facilities. A lot of other companies out there are contemplating capacity, building capacity, and haven't started up yet. So But we actually do not store. If we're storing, it's because it's just we're building inventory to run our lines 24/7, and it's just a natural part of our S&OP supply chain process.
And then to kind of piggyback off that, I think John brings up a good point with competition among recyclers. But what about the actual materials themselves? Is there competition among non-OEM, non-automakers to get these materials too? And are these other companies maybe even willing to pay more for the materials?
Yes and yes, absolutely. So there is a lot of competition for the materials. We get calls. I mean, every plant that I've got planned to build is pretty much sold out because there's just a lack of these elements, right? There's a lack of nickel, there's a lack of lithium, lack of cobalt, things like that. And everybody wants to buy my entire capacity that I sit across the table with and talk to them about. Some of them are OEMs, some are cell manufacturers, some of them are other people out in the world that just want access to these minerals. So yeah, the answer is there's a lot of people out there trying to secure supply of these critical minerals. The other thing, coming back to the IRA, right? They get incentives if they have recycled content. So there's an incentive for an OEM or a cell manufacturer to bring that recycled content, back into their battery or into their vehicle. And, they also get to remember, like, recycled battery materials are about 40% lower carbon footprint than taking new stuff out of the ground. So they've got a whole ESG profile, carbon footprint that they're looking at that feeds into that story that they have for their shareholders as well.
Sorry, John, I think we had interrupted you on one of your questions.
Oh, you're the host. I'm just the guy in the lower left. So one of the things that has started to sort of tickle the corner of my mind, there are some new battery formats, if you like, or arrangements. I would be curious to hear you talk about the comparative ease or difficulty of dismantling packs from different makers or different arrangements, if you like. Traditionally, you have cells in modules in packs, but we're looking at some newer versions, largely for cost cutting on the part of the EV makers, including this notion of a structural pack. I've heard from friends in the auto repair industry that a car with a structural pack is pretty much unrepairable. You get hit in the side, and it's very difficult to tell if the battery is still solid. So just write it off. Yeah. But then at some point, it's going to go to you, or a portion of it, whether or not they have to torch it out, goes to you. Yeah. How easy or difficult is that to recycle?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And one of the things that we try to talk to the OEMs about today, we spend a lot of time with the different manufacturers out there, is kind of, we're not pack designers or engineers that want to come in and design someone's new battery pack for them, but we want to provide them some input on how you can design for recycling in mind, right? Because there's very few battery packs today that have been designed with the end game of recycling them and reusing them. It's just they got to get a pack in a car. A lot of the early EVs were just, if I take part of the engine out, and how do I jam a battery in that little space there and make it fit? We have over 200, I think we're up to like 215 different actually work instructions on how to disassemble different battery packs that we see. So, you can, an OEM today will have a different battery pack in 1 or 2 years, right? The fasteners are going to be a little bit different. They've, like you said, they want to lightweight certain things, so they glue things in there versus, using fasteners. Glue is really not fun, by the way, to try to extract a module from a battery pack. We've had to use crowbars to extract different modules out of a battery pack before because they've been glued in there. But, they did that for obviously weight savings and cost savings. So there's, to your point, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in the future of eventually getting to some automation that you can do a pack disassembly if you've got critical mass of those packs, right? You've got maybe one EV line. I mean, some of the auto OEMs, they've got basically 2 different battery packs now that they're going to use going forward. The shell's going to be different, things like that, but it's going to have a very similar battery pack that's in there. So once that critical mass starts to hit the market, I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity for automation. Today, it's hard to automate because, again, I can tell you, we see a pack from, an OEM today, and the same vehicle, 2 years ago, the pack was different. And they're trying to improve on, one, getting more capacity in there. So the modules are a little bit different now. The fasteners are different. So you've got different tools you got to use to disassemble the pack. But look, we're at early stages, right, with all this. We know that the OEMs are going to want to continue to standardize how they make their vehicles, because that's how they get 1,500 vehicles out the door every day in a battery plant or in a car plant by standardization, and that's going to lead to a point where we'll transition over to much more of the automated approach on pack disassembly, which we're working on that today in our operations.
Are you finding receptivity among OEMs to this notion of designing for recyclability? Because the description that stuck with me from the conference yesterday was just fill the pack with black goo.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Some are receptive. Some are saying they don't want us to help them, right? They want to do it all themselves. They view that as something proprietary that they would prefer not to have input from. But we are sitting down with a number of OEMs and saying, look, when this pack is done, you've got to be able to disassemble all these bolts and rivets and everything that's in there. You got to be able to pull the packs out. And what are some of the materials that you can reuse, right? I mean, some of these things, if you look at some of even the structural things in there that haven't been damaged, or there's aluminum parts, there's wiring harnesses, are there opportunities to potentially reuse some of that stuff? I mean, there are definitely parts in there that can be reused. The cooling systems, you could probably reuse some of those cooling systems because they're pretty much pristine. But there's things like that we're talking about with OEMs. So I do think there's an opportunity for us to look at how you make that a little bit more automated. Obviously, my whole message is, look, if I can disassemble these battery packs faster, recycle them faster for you, it's going to be lower cost. And lower cost means that you can save money on your battery, then you have to build a new battery again.
Do you feel like battery swapping could be a solution to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. China's doing it. I mean, everybody follows what China's doing, what company like NIO and those companies are doing over there. And I've seen it firsthand when I lived in China. I was there for a couple of years living over there and saw it firsthand. They were installing these little NIO little garages in the downtown area in Shanghai. Got to see actually a vehicle pull in, and like within 5 minutes, it had a new battery and it drove out. I think there's going to be some opportunity for that in certain areas. I mean, if you think about it, heavily populated areas where there's a critical mass of a certain brand. I mean, these are going to be branded little kiosks, right? It's not going to be a standardized where every car can drive into it. But I do think that there's an opportunity for that. I think it's going to come into play, like how fast does the charging infrastructure get built up, right? I mean, you also have, like, again, the reason it's used in Shanghai or in China is because you got apartment complexes that are 70 stories tall, and not everybody can charge their vehicle, right? So I think you're going to have the same thing in a lot of, I think of Manhattan, for example, right? I mean, they're not going to be able to put charging stations everywhere in the city of Manhattan. So is there an opportunity for swapping in a city like that? Yeah, I'm with you, John. I don't know if people can get their head around it. The consumer in the U.S. can get their head around doing something like that, because you don't like to not own your engine of your car. And you're kind of giving up that freedom, right? By saying, well, I'm just going to go and swap it out and hope everything's good when I get a new battery in there.
I guess I look at it as a logistics play. It may work in fleet duties, whether it's Ubers that operate within a given geofenced region, or even better, delivery trucks that have fairly known cycles. For Americans who drive much more randomly or have more extreme use cases, it's just electrons weigh very little, battery packs weigh a whole lot, and you can probably meet 85% of the need. But when everybody drives west to visit grandma on the holiday, that's when you really end up with battery swapping peaks that require you to move tons and tons and tons of stuff really quickly.
Yeah.
No, John, I tend to agree with you there. And to your point, kind of too, Fisker just announced that they're going to do battery swapping. And, to your point, they say they're targeting fleets first.
Yeah. There's definitely applications where I think it does make sense, right? I mean, the other thing everybody's worried about range anxiety, and I get it. When you're driving, 7 hours a day, I can understand why you would have range anxiety, but the average person doesn't drive more than 50 miles a day, right? I mean, I think it's actually like 30 miles a day. So do you really need to have swapping when you can charge your car at home at night when you get home to your garage?
The challenge there is used EVs and the people who are much more likely to live in multiple dwellings. But as I keep saying, very few people sit down with their better half and say, honey, I think we should buy a car that meets some of our needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I agree.
I think the whole idea of range anxiety is more at this moment charging infrastructure anxiety.
Yeah.
Because people are starting to know it's out there. They're also starting to know that if it's not a Tesla, it doesn't work reliably enough. For me, this is a hobby horse. John's seen this already. It shouldn't be that high a bar to make the EV public charging infrastructure at least as pleasant and reliable as a gas station.
Agreed.
So,
Hey, look, we
I
got to
agree
take
with
a quick commercial break. We'll be back in 30 seconds to talk about a whole bunch more because this is going great.
Awesome. Thank you.
How do Bridgestone tires stop shorter on wet roads? It's their HydroTrack technology. But you don't have to know how the science works, just where the brake is. What really matters is their Bridgestone.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what BorgWarner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry.
All right, we're back talking all kinds of things about recycling batteries. David, we touched on LFP. As you know, there's some interesting development work being done with sulfur batteries, lithium sulfur and lithium sodium. You see the same sort of problems with them in terms of being able to turn a profit on recycling the batteries as you do with LFP?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at recycling, obviously the value proposition of recycling materials is you've got, something that's valuable to recycle, right? So whether it's a lithium molecule in there or a nickel molecule, I mean, obviously sulfur, sodium, there's a lot of discussion around sodium ion batteries right now. And, sodium is very abundant, but are you going to recycle a sodium battery if it's abundant, right? Then the question should be okay, what are you going to do with that battery when it's done? Does it make sense to even recycle it because there's so much abundance of this material? And look, I get why there's a lot of discussion around these things because there's lack of a lot of these minerals that we're talking about today, and right now people are nervous about not having the supply of them to be able to produce the batteries that they need to propel their fleets. But look, in the end of the day, I think as recycling continues to get more prominent and we recover a lot more of these metals than we have in the past. But you also get more. I mean, there's going to be more mining operations that will start up. We're going to have access to more of these minerals. I think that also tends to lead into the fact that lithium's it's number 3 on the periodic table for a reason. It's a really good element. It stores a lot of energy. It's light. It's hard to beat. I step back and you think of the billions of dollars of capacity that's been put in the ground now, or billions of dollars of bets that OEMs have now put in to converting to lithium ion based battery technology. It's going to be hard to beat that. And I think lithium ion it's still got a lot of room in it to improve, quite honestly. It's not done yet for the capacity, the range, the cycling, the charging rates and stuff like that. There's still a tremendous amount of innovation required or options available in lithium ion that I see that will even make it harder to beat from a technology perspective. Performance matters, right? Performance matters.
Yeah.
Do you see recycling challenges that are different if at some point we start to get volume solid state cells, which has been talked about for a lot of years now?
Yeah.
A lot of people seem to view them as the holy grail. I tend to think we will have variants of what we got now throughout this decade.
Yeah.
But is recycling solid state fundamentally different?
Not really. I mean, the great thing about solid state is you've got some positives, I think, from recycling. It actually makes it easier to recycling because you don't have a volatile solvent to deal with, right? You've got a cathode that's pretty much going to be very similar, right? It'll have, typically it's an NMC cathode today, but then you've got now more lithium in there, right? You got a lithium metal anode, for example, and a separator that's either ceramic or plastic, depending on which technology you choose. So I think actually a solid state battery is even going to be more valuable and drive more need for recycle than today's batteries. So you get it's like a win-win for the industry, yeah, right? You get a win because there's more energy density there. You can have longer range of your vehicles. You can charge faster. But then from a recyclability perspective, it's even another win for the industry because there's more metals that are valuable to recover in a solid state battery. You don't have to worry about some of the electrolyte waste and those streams that you've got to treat from an auxiliary perspective, because that's it's virtually going to be removed from those batteries. So I think solid state is a win-win for the industry.
It seems to me that you're in the driver's seat here, David. We got a question from one of our viewers here, a guy named Dan Hummel, who said, what about all that child labor that's involved in mining? And what about all the damage to the environment from mining? He raises a really good point there. If you're recycling, you avoid that. On top of that, you mentioned that the carbon footprint of the materials that you're supplying that have been recycled have a 40% smaller carbon footprint. So automakers and others are going to want that kind of claim for their ESG efforts.
Yeah.
I can see companies really bidding on this. Are you going to get a premium for these things, or are you just hoping for something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had a lot of discussions with some of our customers about, the premium for recycled content. And I'm a little selfish, obviously, and biased, but I do think recycled, content should deserve a premium. Everybody, if you look at the plastics industry, a lot of people talk about the plastics industry. Guess what? Recycled plastic gets a premium today. So I think it's, there's a couple things that the way I bring the story about it's one, there's a lot of work that's required to take these metals out again and recycle them, refine them back to a battery grade quality, right? So there's a lot of time, energy, and money spent to do that. On top of that, again, companies are going to get incentives for using recycled content, right? So there's value to the company to be able to use that recycled content. They're going to get some value back from that. And then on top of that, you've got an ESG story that you're going to tell. I mean, every company out there, OEM, is talking about being net zero by 2040, 2050, whenever it is. And you can't be net zero without doing some form of recycling of the materials that you're using. So there's a lot of value, I think, in the recycled content of the materials and the recycled metals that we're producing, which in my mind, it should deserve some premium, right? I'm not saying you take all the premium that they're getting by the messaging and the incentives that they get, but I do think there's definitely some premium there. And, to your point earlier, we obviously are going to continue to need to mine materials out of the ground. That's a fact of life. It's going to be that way for a long time still. But again, there's two things that we want to support. One is we're going to do all this we can sustainably from the recycling perspective, but it also forces companies that are doing some of the mining to also think a little bit about their sustainability footprint and how they do it sustainable as well. And, again, mining today is a lot different than mining it was, 20, 30 years ago, right? There's a lot of sustainability efforts being put into mining. So I don't want to ever knock what the folks that are out there trying to do mining, because they're doing a lot of work to make sure it's a sustainable operation and not the way it was, 30 years ago. But all that, when you tie all that together, right, what are we trying to accomplish here, right? I always what's our end game here? And it's to reduce our carbon footprint, right? So in the end of the day, we've got to think about ways from recycling to mining to all those things have to come into play to just reduce the overall carbon footprint that we have on the earth today. Otherwise, we're going to have continued challenges on greenhouse gases and whether you believe in climate change, things like that, those things are, obviously seeing effects of that.
I would also hope that we might be able to do mining more conscientiously in North America and associated countries than some of the stories that have come out from other countries in the world. North America seems to have been quite happy to outsource much of its environmental degradation to another country 30 or 40 years ago. And we have discovered there are some downsides to that. So it'll be interesting to see if we can do this responsibly.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. Absolutely. I think we're, like you said, right, we've kind of unfortunately taken advantage of other parts of the world, right, to kind of shed that burden off. But if you want to have a sustained supply chain, you want to have something that's a little bit more regionalized, and you talk about national security and different things like that. We can get into that story. It's you got to think about how you do this stuff in house and being more sustainable about how we operate our mines, or even sustainable about how we recycle batteries is a key element of that.
David, you're talking about emissions in a way, and I'm wondering about logistics of Cirba. You say you've got 6 locations in North America. I'm curious about, a supplier for a car company is typically located close to the manufacturing plant. Is it the same sort of thing with recycling too?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we have the facilities located where they're at, and we're going to continue to regionalize our footprint. You want to be close to not only your incoming customer, which is the supply of raw materials to process, but also you want to be close to your output, your customer that's going to be producing, for example, a cathode plant. There's obviously a few cathode plants that have been announced in North America. So we're obviously strategically looking at, where's the feed source from all the gigafactories, or where's the highest concentration of end-of-life batteries going to come first, and how do we position our facilities to be able to manage that waste? Waste management, things like that are very regionalized. So again, we look at it too when we talk to the OEMs. We've had some OEMs ask me, like, David, we've got 1,500 dealerships around North America. How fast can you get batteries from these dealerships? Because we don't want to store batteries in our, in our garages, right? So we've got to be able to have a footprint that can, within 24 to 48 hours can get to their facilities and pick up these batteries and process them.
What have you learned from 20 years worth of efforts in recycling smaller hybrid packs? Because I presume those questions for a Toyota, for instance, were answered umpty years ago. What have you learned?
Yeah, I think, well, a couple things. You learn, one, how to package things safely, right? So if you think about the transportation of a battery, you've got to have a vehicle that's permitted to be able to do that, because you're, in some cases you're dealing with a hazardous waste, right? If it's been damaged, we call them DDR, damaged, defective, or recalled batteries. So you got to manage that properly. So we've got a ton of experience on just making sure, one, we've got the right permitting capabilities for our drivers, for our trucks. We've got our trucks are outfitted with safety devices to ensure that if there is a challenge or an issue, because sometimes you don't know, right? You could be driving down the road and there could be some problem that occurs. You've got the capability to manage that properly, which comes into the packaging aspect of things. So we work with a lot of our OEMs on providing the proper packaging. These EV battery packs are, they're big, right? They're not small packs. They've got a lot of energy stored in them, and in some cases there's still energy in them. They're not totally discharged. And we've got to make sure that we've got the right packaging to make sure they don't get damaged and they're transported safely. So it starts all the way at the beginning, right, of transport, packaging, and then just getting them to your facilities to be able to process them quickly. And we've learned, over time, like you mentioned, Toyota, a lot of the Priuses and things like that are coming off the road, and how they're aggregating their materials within their dealer network too, to make sure that we've got facilities to be able to process them quickly for them.
Hey, David, how about battery packs that have caught on fire? Are you able to do anything with those? Is there anything salvageable from the pack?
Absolutely, 100%. We run those through our process just like a normal battery pack. They're actually easier because they've already burned off the energy, to be honest with you. So they're easier to process. Sometimes they're a little bit more difficult to take the pack apart because some things have melted and stuff like that. But in all honesty, they're, if the whole battery's been damaged, they're a lot easier to process. But like I said earlier, the nickel, the cobalt, the lithium, things like that, it doesn't just evaporate, right? It doesn't go away. It's still there, contained in that mass of material that's potentially at a thermal event.
So David, sounds like business is going great. And I know you've talked about you're going to invest $1 billion over the next decade to expand. But how do you plan that? And the reason I'm asking that right now is there is a lot of negativity about electric cars. In fact, J.D. Power just came out with a survey that measured the intention of Americans to buy an electric car has gone down. There seems to be more of a reluctance to go with them. So as you plan to expand, how do you see the EV market going?
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody has different studies, right, that they come up with, and there'll be a new one tomorrow that, I mean, it's like earlier this year, China, right? No, people weren't buying EVs in China, and then a month later they had record sales, right? So I think you're going to see ebbs and flows of the market. I mean, it's such a new industry right now. It's so nascent that, we're going to have to adjust with those ebbs and flows. I wish I could draw a linear line for our business model and say this is how it's going to go, but we know there's going to be chunks of the way the profitability and the revenue of our business is going to grow. So we're planning for that. We're making sure that we have capacity in the ground. We also track, we're tracking the gigafactories that are being built. There's over 900 gigawatts of battery capacity that's been announced in North America between now and 2030. That's a lot. And even if you cut that number in half, you just say, oh, there's no way they're going to be able to build that amount of capacity. Let's just cut the number in half. And they run, at really good rates of 10% scrap rate, which is still actually a pretty good scrap rate for a battery pack coming out of the gates. That's still 50 gigawatts of battery scrap, which that's like twice the size of the gigafactory in Nevada that everybody talks about. That's just all day long. It's just producing scrap for you, right? So there's a lot of volume, and even if things slow down a little bit, I mean, look, we obviously got to be nimble and adapt our asset plans and things like that. And we're more than happy to do that. I think the goal for us as a company today is just continue to watch the market dynamics, watch what happens, in the industry about battery capacity being built, as well as what's the need for these raw materials. And we'll be nimble and be able to adjust. We're fortunate enough that we've got an established business today that's profitable and that runs very, very well. We got a great team of people at Cirba that know how to do this stuff pretty well. And we're just going to keep, monitoring the market and adjust accordingly.
What percentage of your business today is lead acid, our standard 12-volt starter batteries?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it from a volume perspective, it's probably on the order of 40% of our business. So again, there's obviously a lot of that business comes in. We've got some really robust contracts from major OEMs where we're collecting those things. I mean, don't forget, every electric vehicle, guess what else it has in it? It has a lead acid battery in it too.
With a couple of exceptions, but yes.
A couple exceptions, but just about everyone. I mean, you know this better than I do, so I should ask you the question, not state the fact. But a lot of them do have that. And I think over time, that's going to eventually go away, right? But I think there's still going to be a strong lead business. And that's one of the things that differentiates us from everybody else is we process every type of battery chemistry, right? So if an OEM calls us and says, we need you to come pick up our batteries, like we can pick up all their batteries, not just, hey, we'll pick up the lithium ones. You guys go find somebody else to take care of the nickel or the lead bad one. We can pick up every battery they have and process that for them. So that's a sweet spot for us today, and something that we're kind of proud of in what we do. And I think it definitely differentiates us going forward.
So how do car batteries show up to you? Are they in the full pack form or modules, or how do they come?
Yeah, it's all of the above, quite honestly. I mean, we'll get electrode scrap, we'll get cathode slurry, we'll get battery cells, we get, packs themselves, and we get the full, like it just came out of a car, right? The full battery, the battery pack itself with the modules all still, in place in it. So we kind of see everything across the gamut, quite honestly. We get, like I said, we get the 18650 cells that didn't make it into a battery pack, or the 21700s now. So we kind of see all across the board.
So what does that mean? What does that mean for your workers? Do your workers have to then learn how to break down these packs and then be trained in working with different chemistries and stuff as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We have different lines for different chemistries, obviously, whether it's nickel or lead or alkaline versus lithium ion. We don't set, if we've got an NCA battery from a old 18650 or an LCO battery from a cell phone, those go through our main lithium line. So we don't separate those out today. I think over time, coming back to the LFP question, right? Maybe we have an LFP line because we are really only going to focus on lithium extraction on that line. So those are things that we're designing into our systems to be able to have that versatility to do that. But our workers are trained. I mean, we spend a lot of time training them to separate the battery chemistries, and also take the battery packs apart. I mentioned, over 200 work instructions on how to change and disassemble different battery packs. And that's something that we train on every day and make sure that we're doing that safely.
Is there any business at all in assessing modules in a fresher pack, or does everything that come into your factory get torn down to its basic elements?
No, we do have diagnostic testing. So we do perform some diagnostic testing work for some of the OEMs out there. And we've got kind of a system set up in place where we can do diagnostic testing for specific OEMs based on the battery management system that they have, where we can plug in and test impedance across different cells, test the charge discharge rates. So we do a little bit of that diagnostic testing. Some of it, today, the majority of that is for batteries that have been shipped from overseas, and they want to just make sure that the state of health of that battery is in good shape before they send it to their car plants before it gets put into a vehicle. So we have a facility out in California that does that, and we'll run through a number of different battery packs that come in just to test the state of charge, make sure that they're safe and they haven't been jostled around on a ship, or they haven't had any damage to them, and make sure that they can be safely shipped to their battery facility or their car facility to be put in an electric vehicle.
I guess I was going in a slightly different direction, which was, let's say you get in 100 kilowatt hour pack from some EV. If that car is only 5 years old, the pack may have been deemed junk for a variety of reasons or scrappable. But is there any business for you or for other people in taking off the cover, testing the modules and saying, these modules are so within spec that they can actually be reused, whereas these ones can't? Or is it all just in the grinder?
Yeah, I mean, right now you got to look at it from an economics perspective, right? So the question is, okay, John, you're going to go buy a new EV and it's got some used packs in there that were still in spec. Are you are you comfortable with that, right? I mean, in the end of the day, it does come down to the liability that whoever is going to certify that battery pack again to go back into a vehicle, right? So when you look at it, there are modules that may be good, but then you're saying, okay, what I'm doing is I'm now going to take the liability to tell the consumer now that the battery's good, and if there's a failure, now who owns that liability, right?
So a version of the second life question, essentially.
It's kind of the same discussion. And I can't say that everything is going to be definitive yes or no, because I think over time people are going to want to start saying, well, look, I'm okay with buying a used battery pack if it still has 5 years life in it, right? But to your point, you've got to be you got to know very well what that battery has gone through, right? How much abuse it's been gone through, because not just testing the impedance or the charge discharge is going to tell you that. You can't, unless you go under a microscope and look at the dendrite formation on the cell itself, is going to be hard to tell you whether, is it going to last 5 more years or going to be 3.5, right? And that's a big difference to a consumer, right? Another 1.5 years on a battery pack.
Well, and given that OEMs don't seem to aggregate charging behavior in many cases, you don't even know how it's been charged. So yeah, okay.
Right. There's just so many variables today. I think over time, as things standardize, you allow yourself to reduce the variables, so you then can predict what the long-term life of a battery might be. But there's just so many variables out there today: charge, discharge, how the person drives it. Really, the battery chemistry is changing so much as well. When I look at an electric vehicle, we're all at this point right now, I think we want the best, right? We want the best technology that's out there, and that's typically the newest, and it's only like 1 year old typically, right? So there's so many iterations now in this space that, a 3-year-old Tesla's got a different chemistry, a different, kilowatt hour. It's all different. And, if I'm going to buy a brand new vehicle like that, I want something that's got the best and the brightest in it.
I gave up completely on trying to track Tesla changes. It's just
yeah,
for someone else.
Everybody's changing. Yeah,
David, right now you've got trucks running around hither and yon, picking up batteries and bringing it to your recycling facilities. That's doable now because there aren't a whole lot of EV batteries to recycle. But some years down the road, there's going to be a monster wave of these things coming. How do you see it playing out, or how would you like to see it play out? Are you going to continue to make these milk runs, so to speak, with the trucks picking it up, or is there going to be some sort of centralization? Or where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think that comes back, John, to the question we had earlier around the localization of our asset footprint, right? So, I mean, you can't have obviously a facility in every state to process batteries. I think it's probably not, from a scale perspective, may not be cost effective to do that. But if you can regionalize in a lot of these different highly populated areas where there's going to be, like I was saying, we're studying all this end of life where we think there's going to be a high density of end of life batteries coming off the road, and siting our facilities around those areas. I think that's going to minimize the challenge, right? And in terms of the ability for a truck to go pick up a battery or pick up a number of batteries. We do have over 300 virtual warehouses across the nation right now that we do aggregate. So we're not just going and picking up 1 or 2 batteries. We try to aggregate as much as we can. Again, we're obviously looking at reducing our costs and our CO2 footprint and how we do that. So we're going to continue to build out those aggregation centers for us, and make sure that as we do transport these batteries, we've got full truckloads, we've got backhauls, different things like that to really help out the logistics structure that we have in our business model.
And then, do you guys ever get down to if you break down a module, do you get down to the individual cells themselves at all and test those?
Not typically. We typically test packs, right? Because a lot of these cells are put in different packs, and if you look at an OEM today, they have typically 8 or 10 packs depending on the size of the battery itself. So a lot of the testing is really done at the pack level, the module level inside a pack, not at the cell level. It's just if you've seen a battery, if you've seen whether it's a Tesla or any other battery taken apart, I mean, if it's a prismatic cell, they're all kind of structured and lined up together and kind of welded together in some form or fashion. Same with an 18650, 21700, or a 4680. Now they're all kind of wired together, so it's really hard to test the individual cells themselves. And again, you got to remember from a labor perspective, what's the cost of doing that as well, right? You got to be really efficient what you're doing, and and making sure that you don't, overextend yourself in just the time you spend doing that.
Well, the reason I asked, I was kind of piggybacking off of what John was talking about, testing packs and modules and stuff like that. I was just curious if you do get a module that's good, that still has some good life left in it. Are those going back to the automaker? Are those going back to the battery maker? Is there maybe, I know there's even some used companies that are starting to sell used battery packs and bringing modules and cells back together. I just didn't know who's getting these good modules and packs if you find them.
Yeah, I think, typically if we've got some packs, I mean, usually we're if we're acquiring a battery pack, we're keeping it ourselves, obviously, and reprocessing it if we need to. I think, again, I was mentioning some of the OEMs have us do diagnostic testing and do, state of health and stuff like that. If we do find a bad cell, for example, or a bad module, I should say, we take that module out and put a new one in, and then they've got their engineers that can recertify everything based on our testing and stuff like that. So we do a lot of that stuff. It's more finding the bad one and replacing it with a good one versus the other way around, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Hey, look, we're coming up to the top of the hour here, more or less. Probably a good time to wrap it up. But David Klanecky, thanks so much for coming on. You've been a wealth of information.
Thank you very much. No, it's been great. I appreciate it. It's again, we talked earlier at the top of the hour. It's a phenomenal space right now. There's so much. I think there's so much innovation still, obviously, in this industry, and opportunity for companies like ourselves to continue to improve on how we extract these metals and reuse them again. I think at the end of the day, this whole OEM space and the EV space is just fascinating how it's developing, and everybody's kind of positioning for developing the best battery chemistry, the best battery technology out there, and the best vehicles. And I look at our job is to try to help them kind of realize that goal and make sure that we keep all these metals out of the ground and keep them above ground, out of landfills, and keep making sure they get reused over and over again. That's really kind of why we're here and why we exist.
Yeah. John, any closing thoughts?
Not particularly. This is a very rich topic. I'm actually writing an explainer on it, so you've helped a lot. Thank you, David.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's fantastic. Looking forward to more discussions on this. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah, we'll definitely have you back in the future.
Awesome.
See where this is all gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Okay.
Thanks, John, again for having us. I appreciate it, John. Thanks for having some dialogue. I know you got a great perspective on the space with the work you do as well. And Sean, thanks for getting us all set up and asking some great questions as well.
Hey, yeah, no problem. And I'd also like to throw out there, if everybody's enjoying the show here, please like, comment, or subscribe. It really helps us out. So thanks.
Yeah, awesome.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
If you like this program and would like to learn more about the automotive industry, check out our website at autoline.tv or look for us on YouTube on the AutoLine channel.